homeless girl asks for leftovers from a rich woman, but neither knows their mother and daughter separated by a terrible secret. As the truth unravels, powerful forces try to tear them apart. Don't miss this unbelievable story that will keep you watching to the end. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story, it's a deeply human journey about lost resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances and the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now let's begin. Have you ever felt like a single ordinary moment could shatter your entire reality? Clara Westwood never expected that question to come in the form of a trembling child, standing in the rain outside the Golden Hearth, San Francisco's most exclusive restaurant. The storm outside mirrored Clara's stormy heart as she sat alone in her usual corner picking at a dinner that had gone cold hours ago. The candlelight flickered on the fine linens as her mind drifted back to the day everything in her life fell apart 20 years ago, a day she had sworn never to revisit. And yet fate, it seemed, had other plans. It began with a soft, almost invisible voice, nearly lost beneath the clatter of silverware and muted conversations of powerful diners. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I have your leftovers? I promise I won't spill anything." Clara froze the delicate wine glass suspended midair. She looked down, and there stood a little girl no older than 7, clothes, soaked hair, matted cheeks smudged with dirt. But it wasn't the poverty that cut into Clara's heart, it was those eyes. Big, bright, and so heartbreakingly familiar. Eyes she had seen only once before, on the day she held her newborn daughter for the first and supposedly last time. As the maitre d' rushed forward, mortified at the sight of a homeless child disrupting the refined atmosphere, Clara raised a hand, her voice like steel hidden in velvet. "It's fine," she said, her eyes locked on the child's. The restaurant fell into an uneasy hush. Forks paused mid-bite, curious glances darting over menus. Clara reached for the untouched plate and pushed it gently toward the child. The girl looked shocked, hesitating as if the food might be snatched away at any second. Then Clara noticed it, a small frayed handkerchief clutched in the child's palm, embroidered with the initials C.W. Her breath caught so sharply it hurt. That couldn't be. She had those initials sewn into the blanket she wrapped her baby in 20 years ago. Her mind swirled with questions she had buried deep. Could this child truly be connected to the daughter she had lost, Sophie? That was the name the little girl finally offered in a whisper. Sophie's thin hands trembled as she shoveled food into her mouth with a desperation no child should ever know. Each bite looked painful and beautiful all at once, like a soul remembering what kindness felt like. Tears stung Clara's eyes, and she struggled to maintain her composure as memories she had locked away began clawing back to the surface. Across the restaurant, diners looked on with a mixture of discomfort and pity. Some judged shaking their heads at a millionaire entertaining a filthy street child at her table. Others whispered about what tragedy might have led to this unlikely pairing. Clara saw none of them. In that moment, the world had shrunk to just her and Sophie. Have you heard stories of children who vanish only to be found years later because of a tiny forgotten object? Like the real-life case of Carlina White, who was abducted as an infant and rediscovered 23 years later when a childhood photo and a mother's instinct reconnected their lives. These stories teach us that miracles sometimes hide in the smallest details, just like the handkerchief in Sophie's pocket. As Sophie ate, Clara's thoughts swung between disbelief and hope. She wondered how many nights this child had spent sleeping on cold concrete, how many strangers had passed without seeing her, and how many times she'd had to beg to survive. Each answer made Clara's chest tighten with a helpless ache. A single moment can define a lifetime, and sometimes that moment begins with a question as simple as, "Can I eat your leftovers?" It's a question that can break your heart and open force you to face wounds you thought had scarred over. But it can also be a question that starts a journey to healing. The lesson here, if there is one, is that compassion can change the trajectory of not just one life, but two. It reminds us that we never truly know the stories carried by those we cross paths with, especially the small, quiet souls we are quickest to overlook. If Clara had chosen to look away to push Sophie aside as an inconvenience, the miracle that was about to unfold might have remained buried forever. Clara reached across the table, her fingers brushing Sophie's cold, damp hand. She looked deeply into the little girl's eyes, searching for pieces of herself. Tears streamed down Sophie's cheeks as if the warmth of human kindness had finally broken the dam of loneliness. And in that simple, trembling connection, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in 2 decades' hope. Outside, the storm still raged, lightning flashing across the San Francisco skyline. But inside the golden hearth, a woman and a child sat together, a world of possibilities opening between them. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test the strength of their hearts, the depths of their courage, and the power of love to right the wrongs of the past. Before you hear what happens when Clara decides to invite Sophie into her home, a decision that will unravel shocking secrets buried for decades, let's take a moment to wonder, what would you do if a child with your eyes asked for your leftovers? Stay with us. The truth waiting to be uncovered is far more extraordinary than anything you could imagine. Clara Westwood's penthouse perched atop Nob Hill was the kind of place most people only saw in glossy magazines. Gleaming marble floors reflected the city lights, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the Golden Gate Bridge. For Clara, though the silence in these vast rooms had always felt more like an echo of everything she'd lost. Tonight, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. But as Clara stepped inside with Sophie's small, trembling hand in hers, she realized that luxury meant something very different to a child who had spent her nights curled up in doorways. The elevator ride up to the 38th floor was quiet, but heavy with Sophie's unspoken fear. Clara squeezed her hand gently, trying to reassure her. When the elevator doors slid open to reveal a hallway of modern art and polished brass, Sophie's eyes widened in awe and terror. She pulled her hand back, her shoulders tensing as if ready to bolt. Clara knelt to her level, trying to catch her gaze. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe here." But Sophie's eyes darted around the foyer, taking in the pristine white couches and sparkling chandeliers, like traps waiting to spring. She lingered at the threshold, unsure if she was really allowed to enter. Clara felt a pang so deep it made her breath catch. How could a child be more afraid of warmth than the cold streets? In the kitchen, Clara prepared a simple cup of hot cocoa. Sophie stood near the doorway, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if bracing for the moment she'd be told to leave. The kitchen, usually sterile and lonely, now felt alive with a quiet tension. When Clara set the steaming mug on the table and gestured Sophie to sit, the little girl hesitated before inching into the chair as though expecting it to vanish. "Have you ever had hot chocolate before?" Clara asked gently, trying to make conversation feel normal. Sophie shook her head. She lifted the cup with both hands, savoring the warmth that seeped into her cold fingers. Tears pricked Clara's eyes as she watched the child's small face soften just a little in the glow of comfort. Clara invited Sophie to take a bath, leading her through the penthouse with walls adorned by art pieces Clara had collected over decades. Sophie's eyes flickered from the paintings to the soft carpets and the enormous bed in the guest room. But when Clara opened the bathroom door and showed her the wide claw-foot tub, Sophie took a step back, shaking her head frantically. I don't know how she stammered. The words felt like a knife in Clara's chest. She remembered the statistics she had once read while supporting charities for foster youth. Thousands of American children live without basic hygiene because shelter bathrooms are too dangerous or too filthy. The fear in Sophie's eyes was a cruel reminder of how even kindness could feel unfamiliar, almost threatening to a child used to surviving alone. Clara smiled softly, masking her own heartbreak. "That's okay. I can help you," she said. She turned on the faucet and let the warm water pour, adding bubbles that smelled faintly of lavender. Sophie watched entranced by the swirl of foam. When Clara handed her a fluffy towel, the little girl finally allowed herself to step inside the bathroom, turning once to make sure Clara wasn't leaving her. While Sophie bathed, Clara sat outside the door, head in her hands, fighting tears. Every giggle from inside felt like a miracle. The quiet splashes were the music of hope she had long stopped believing in. As the minutes passed, Clara realized how much she had missed the sounds of childhood in her home. When Sophie emerged, dressed in an oversized sweatshirt that swallowed her small frame, Clara's breath caught again. The child looked impossibly fragile, yet radiant cheeks pink from warm water hair combed back, revealing eyes too wise for their age. Clara knelt and pulled her gently into a hug. "You look beautiful," she whispered. Sophie tensed at first, then melted into the embrace, burying her face in Clara's shoulder. Tears soaked Clara's shirt, but she didn't care. She would have stood there all night if it meant Sophie felt safe. They moved to the living room where Clara lit the fireplace. Sophie sat close to the flames, her eyes wide, hands spread out to feel the heat. "Is it really okay for me to be here?" she asked, her voice so small it almost vanished into the crackling fire. "Are you going to send me back to the shelter if I break something?" The question shattered Clara's heart. "No, sweetie," Clara replied softly, brushing a stray hair from Sophie's face. "You don't ever have to go back there." Sophie glanced around the room, her gaze lingering on the family photos lining the shelves, photos of Clara with people Sophie didn't recognize. There was an unspoken question in her eyes. Where did she fit in this beautiful, unfamiliar world? Clara felt it too. She had spent years building a fortress around her heart. Now, in a single evening, a small child had broken it open. As they sat together sipping cocoa, Sophie surprised Clara by quietly humming a lullaby. The tune was unmistakable, an old forgotten version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with lyrics Clara had made up during sleepless nights before giving birth. Her eyes filled with tears. "How could Sophie know that song? Who taught you that?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. Sophie shrugged. "I don't know. I just remember it. Sometimes I hear it in my dreams." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Could this child truly be the daughter Clara thought had died so many years ago? Clara forced herself to breathe, to focus on the child before her, instead of the wild, impossible hope rising in her chest. The lesson here is simple yet profound. To a child who has never known safety, love can feel terrifying. But to the person offering it, there is nothing more powerful. We must remember that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone in, especially when we're afraid of losing them again. Clara Westwood had barely slept. The soft, even breaths of Sophie sleeping on the couch were the only thing keeping her grounded, as questions swirled like a storm in her mind. At dawn, she picked up the phone and dialed the only person she trusted to find answers, Frank Delaney, a retired private investigator who once specialized in missing children. Frank had a reputation for seeing patterns where others only saw chaos. When Frank arrived at Clara's penthouse, his eyes went immediately to Sophie, still curled up under a blanket, tiny face peaceful in the early light. Clara motioned him to the study where she laid out the only clues she had, the handkerchief with her initials, the lullaby Sophie hummed, and a timeline of the night her baby had supposedly died 2 decades ago. Frank listened quietly, the lines in his weathered face deepening as Clara spoke. "This doesn't add up," he said finally. "Babies don't just disappear. And the fact she remembers your lullaby? Someone's been hiding something big." He began digging into hospital records from the night Clara's daughter was born. Within hours, Frank uncovered something that made Clara's blood run cold. The official death certificate for her baby was filed under an alias, and the paperwork was riddled with inconsistencies, typos, mismatched signatures, and suspicious timestamps. It was as if someone had rushed to bury the truth. Frank also discovered a trail of foster placements connected to Sophie. Over the past 6 years, she'd bounced between 5 families in 3 counties, each time returned to the system with vague notes like incompatible or behavioral issues. But one note stood out, a caseworker's comment that Sophie was too emotionally aware for her age. Clara realized with horror that it wasn't Sophie's fault she couldn't stay. She was being kept moving deliberately. While Clara and Frank pored over documents, Sophie woke and wandered into the study. She climbed onto Clara's lap and watched them with wide, curious eyes. Clara hugged her tightly, heart aching at the thought of all Sophie had endured alone. "Are you trying to find my real mom?" Sophie asked softly, her voice so heartbreakingly hopeful. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "Yes, sweetheart, we're trying to find out everything." Frank hesitated, then placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "I think I know who might be behind this," he said. He pulled up a photo of Elliot Blackthorne, a powerful real estate mogul with a well-known appetite for ruthless deals. Clara's breath caught as she stared at the man she once trusted, the man who had broken her heart all those years ago. "Elliot," she whispered. Frank nodded grimly. "I found records connecting him to donations made to several of the foster agencies that handled Sophie's placements. It looks like he's been quietly funding them for years." Clara felt her hand shake with rage and fear. If Elliot had orchestrated Sophie's disappearance, what else had he been willing to do to protect his secrets? To help Clara understand how something like this could happen, Frank told her about a real case he'd investigated a decade earlier. A wealthy politician had arranged for his child, born out of an affair, to disappear into the foster system to avoid scandal. The child was shuffled between homes so no one could grow attached or start asking questions. Clara's stomach churned. She had once thought stories like that were urban legends, but now it was her reality. They decided to confront the only person who could confirm the truth. Frank arranged a meeting with a retired nurse named Judith Miller, who had worked the night Clara's daughter was born. Judith now lived in a small apartment across the bay in Oakland. When Clara and Frank arrived, the frail woman opened the door and gasped the moment she saw Clara's face. "My God," she murmured. "You look just like you did back then." Judith invited them in her hands, trembling as she poured tea. Tears welled in her eyes as she described how, on the night of Clara's delivery, Elliot had appeared at the hospital with 2 men in dark suits. "They said the baby had died, but I remember hearing her cry," Judith's whispered voice cracking. "They took her away while you were unconscious." Sophie sat next to Clara, eyes darting between the adults, as if trying to piece the puzzle herself. Clara took her hand, voice gentle but firm. "Judith, did you ever see what happened to the baby after they took her?" The old nurse shook her head. "No, but I always felt guilty for not speaking up." The air in the apartment grew heavy with unspoken grief. Judith placed a hand on Sophie's cheek. "You're her, aren't you? You survived." Sophie's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at Clara. "Does that mean you're my mom?" she asked in a trembling voice. Clara's heart shattered and healed all at once. She hugged Sophie close, feeling the truth settling around them like a warm, protective blanket. In that moment, Clara realized the most important lesson of all: the shadows of the past can only control us if we let them. Facing them head-on is terrifying, but it's the only way to reclaim what was stolen and protect what matters most. Frank's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. He checked the message, his expression darkening. "Elliot knows we're looking," he said quietly, "and he's not going to let this go without a fight." Clara pulled Sophie into her lap, determination burning in her chest. She had spent 20 years haunted by a lie, but now, with Sophie beside her, she would not back down. The truth was coming to light, and Clara would make sure the man who took everything paid for his crimes. The sun was shining over Alamo Square, casting a warm golden light across the rolling green lawns, where Clara Westwood watched Sophie spin in circles, arms outstretched in pure, unfiltered joy. For the first time since they'd met, Sophie looked like a carefree child. Clara couldn't stop smiling as she snapped photos capturing the kind of memories she once thought she'd never have. But as she lowered her phone, she caught a flicker of movement near the edge of the park. A dark SUV idling too long, a figure leaning against a lamppost, with eyes that never left Sophie. Clara's heart squeezed painfully as every instinct screamed danger. "Time to go, sweetheart," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. Sophie giggled and started to run toward her, but before she could reach Clara's outstretched arms, a man in a black jacket stepped out from behind a tree, snatched Sophie up, and sprinted to the waiting SUV. Clara's scream tore through the air as the vehicle screeched away, leaving only the echo of Sophie's terrified cry, "Mom." For a moment, Clara stood frozen, the world narrowing to a pinpoint of horror. Then her grief ignited into rage. She bolted to her car, fumbling with the keys as her hands shook uncontrollably. She dialed Frank Delaney on speaker voice raw. "They took her. Frank, he took her." Frank's voice came back instantly, sharp and commanding. "I've got your location. Stay on the phone. Follow them, but don't get too close." Clara slammed the gas pedal tires, screaming as her car surged into traffic. The SUV weaved through the streets of San Francisco, slipping between cars with reckless speed. Clara's eyes locked on its taillights like a lifeline, determination burning hotter than fear. She thought about every night Sophie had spent alone, every bruise and hunger pang the child had endured. She thought about how Sophie called her mom without hesitation. She wouldn't let anyone steal her away again. As they sped through red lights and twisted down side streets, memories flashed like lightning, holding her newborn daughter, believing she was dead, the empty years that followed. Clara clenched the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had already lost Sophie once. She would not survive losing her again. Frank's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "I'm tracking you both. They're heading for the freeway. They won't risk stopping until they're out of the city. Keep eyes on them. I'm calling Detective Naomi Price now." Naomi, the dedicated detective who had once been a foster child herself, knew how the system worked and how it failed kids like Sophie. They roared onto the Golden Gate Bridge, the SUV weaving dangerously between cars. The fog rolled in from the bay, swallowing the bridge in a ghostly shroud that blurred brake lights into shifting red smears. The chase became a terrifying dance between steel cables and swirling mist. Clara gritted her teeth, engine growling, as she matched every turn. "Hang on, baby," she whispered to the empty seat beside her, willing Sophie to hear her silent vow. Frank's updates kept her from losing hope. "Naomi has a roadblock forming at the Marin exit. You just have to keep them on the bridge a little longer." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "I will, I swear." The SUV tried to swerve past a truck, but clipped its bumper, fishtailing wildly before straightening out. Clara seized the moment, pulling up alongside. She glanced through the tinted window and caught a glimpse of Sophie's tear-streaked face pressed against the glass. The child's eyes met hers wide with terror, and Clara felt something inside her snap. She leaned on the horn, desperate to distract the driver. The SUV swerved again, tires screaming as they slammed into the side barrier. Sparks flew as metal shrieked against steel. Clara skidded to a stop and leapt from her car, sprinting to the wrecked SUV. Smoke curled from under the hood, but she barely noticed. She yanked open the back door, heart stopping when she saw Sophie huddled on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's okay, baby. I've got you," Clara gasped, lifting her daughter into her arms. Sophie clung to her like a lifeline, sobbing into Clara's neck. In that moment, with the wind whipping around them on the fog-shrouded bridge, Clara understood something she wanted every parent to hear. Protecting a child isn't just about comfort, it's about courage. Even when you're terrified, even when the odds are against you, you have to keep fighting for them. It's a lesson so many caregivers forget, assuming their job ends when the child is fed and clothed. But true love means risking everything when it matters most. As police cruisers screamed onto the bridge, Detective Naomi Price ran to them, gun drawn, face set in grim determination. She enveloped Clara and Sophie in a protective stance, scanning for more threats. Clara looked up into Naomi's eyes, silently thanking her. Sophie was shaking violently, but her small voice cracked through the chaos. "I knew you'd come for me," she whispered, tears still streaming down her cheeks. The lesson here is one that should echo in every parent's heart. Children who have suffered abandonment often expect it again and again. Every time you show up, you chip away at that fear. Every time you fight for them, you teach them what unconditional love feels like. Detective Naomi cuffed the driver of the SUV, who was already being pulled from the wreck by officers. Clara watched, heart pounding, as the man glared at her with cold, empty eyes. "Elliot sends his regards," he spat. Rage boiled in Clara's veins. Elliot had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. She held Sophie tighter, promising silently that she would never let him hurt their family again. Frank arrived minutes later, skidding to a stop, eyes wide with relief when he saw them safe. "You did it," he breathed. Clara shook her head, her resolve solidifying. "No, not yet. Elliot's still out there." She met Naomi's gaze. "It's time the world knows the truth. We need to go public now before he has a chance to spin the story." Naomi nodded firmly, admiration flashing in her eyes. "Then let's end this. Together." Standing before a sea of microphones at Fisherman's Wharf, Clara Westwood held Sophie's small hand tightly. The sun was setting behind them, casting a golden light over the gathered crowd of reporters, curious onlookers, and everyday people who'd come because they'd seen the desperate plea shared across social media, a mother and child fighting for the truth. Clara glanced down at Sophie, who looked impossibly small yet unshakably brave, and realized this was what hope looked like. Frank Delaney and Detective Naomi Price stood behind them, flanking Clara like unwavering guardians. As the cameras began to stream live, Clara took a deep breath, her voice trembling but clear. "My name is Clara Westwood. 20 years ago I was told my newborn daughter died, but she was alive and stolen." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the hushed crowd. "Her name is Sophie, and she is standing here today because she survived horrors no child should ever face." A murmur swept through the crowd. Clara continued recounting everything they had uncovered: the falsified death certificate, the deliberate shuffling of Sophie through foster homes, and the web of payments tracing back to Elliot Blackthorne. She presented photographs of documents, bank records, and a statement signed by nurse Judith Miller, who had courageously come forward to tell the truth. Each piece of evidence flashed on screens set up around the wharf, and gasps rose from the crowd as the puzzle came together. Then came the most damning moment of all. Detective Naomi stepped forward, holding a digital recorder. She pressed play, and Elliot's unmistakable voice crackled through the speakers. "Make sure she never learns the truth. Keep the girl moving. She's the only leverage I have over Clara." The words hung in the air like poison, the silence afterward broken only by Sophie's quiet sobs. Clara knelt beside her daughter, brushing tears from Sophie's cheeks. "You're so brave," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Sophie nodded, clinging to her mother. Looking up at the cameras, Clara's eyes blazed. "To every parent watching, I want you to know you have the right to fight for your child. No one should ever feel powerless to protect the ones they love." She turned to the crowd, voice stronger now. "And to every child who has felt forgotten or unwanted, you are worth fighting for. You matter." Sophie wiped her eyes, then surprised everyone by stepping up to the microphone herself. Her small voice was soft, but carried across the crowd. "I always thought I wasn't good enough, that no one would ever want me. But my mom found me. And I want every kid out there who feels alone to know they're not." The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. Nearby, Naomi's phone buzzed with updates. Police had taken Elliot Blackthorne into custody as he tried to flee the city. Justice was finally catching up. Clara pulled Sophie close, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead, overwhelmed by a wave of love that felt deeper than anything she'd ever known. In that moment, Clara understood a truth far greater than any secret Elliot had tried to keep. The bonds of family are not broken by lies or time. They are only strengthened by love and the will to fight. It's a lesson we all need to hear, especially those who feel powerless or alone. Real love, the kind that fights through fear and heartbreak, can mend wounds that once seemed beyond healing. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, but Clara ignored them all. She focused only on Sophie, who smiled through her tears, finally looking like the child she was meant to be. Around them, strangers reached out to offer comfort and congratulations. Parents hugged their own children tighter. The ripple of one story bravely told was already spreading. Frank placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "You did it?" he said, voice thick with emotion. Clara shook her head, looking down at Sophie with a fierce smile. "We did it." Months later, in a sunlit room decorated with Sophie's favorite drawings and stuffed animals, Clara read aloud the final court papers, officially recognizing Sophie as her daughter. The legal formality felt almost surreal after everything they had endured, but the moment Sophie looked up and called her mom with absolute certainty, Clara knew the fight had been worth every tear. They spent the evening in Golden Gate Park, watching Sophie chase fireflies, her laughter ringing out in the twilight. It was the simple, perfect sound of a child finally safe. Clara promised herself and Sophie that she would never stop fighting for her and for any other child lost in a system meant to protect them. Because when love stands up to power, it can change everything. And sometimes all it takes is one brave question to begin the journey home. In the end, Clara Westwood's journey was never just about finding her lost daughter. It was about healing wounds she never dared to touch, confronting the shadows of betrayal, and proving that love can break through even the most carefully constructed lies. 20 years of grief had taught her to build walls, but one small girl with familiar eyes and a simple question shattered those defenses in a single moment. That night in the Golden Hearth, when Sophie asked, "Can I eat your leftovers?" a bond was reignited that no one, not time lies or powerful enemies, could extinguish. Their story took them from a lonely penthouse to the fog-choked Golden Gate Bridge, from quiet moments of trust to a terrifying kidnapping that nearly tore them apart again. Along the way, Clara discovered that motherhood is not measured by uninterrupted years together, but by the lengths one will go to protect a child. She learned that courage often looks like shaking hands holding on anyway, that unconditional love means showing up even when you're afraid, and that justice sometimes requires standing alone before the world with the truth in your hands. For Sophie, the journey was one from survival to belonging. She went from being a ghost drifting through foster homes convinced she was unlovable to being a cherished daughter whose voice inspired countless others. Her bravery in speaking up about her pain helped expose a powerful man's crimes, preventing other children from suffering as she did. And in her innocence, she taught everyone watching that even the smallest voices can carry incredible power. This story also reminds us of the importance of those who stand beside us in our darkest hours. People like Frank Delaney and Detective Naomi Price, who refused to look the other way, who believed the impossible, and who lent their strength to help Clara and Sophie reclaim their lives, are proof that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they're friends, neighbors, or strangers who simply choose compassion over indifference. The moral lesson from Clara and Sophie's journey is timeless, yet deeply needed in today's world. True love is patient and fiercely protective. It's about listening to the quiet cries for help, even when the world tells you to keep walking. It's about never giving up on those you care for, even if you have to fight against overwhelming odds. And it's about forgiving yourself for the time lost, choosing instead to pour everything into the time you still have. In our daily lives, we can apply this lesson by looking beyond appearances, remembering that the homeless person asking for help might be someone's lost child, that the angry teen might be hiding deep wounds, that our own loved ones need patience and understanding more than we know. We can strive to show up for others with kindness, to listen without judgment, and to protect the vulnerable even when it's inconvenient. If Clara's story teaches us anything, it's that the simplest acts of compassion can change a life, and maybe even save one. And no matter how broken or hopeless things may seem, love remains the strongest force we have to mend what's been torn apart. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us today. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you won't miss our next heartfelt stories. Your support means the world to us and gives us the inspiration to keep bringing you more true stories of hope, courage, and love. We appreciate you more than words can say. Thank you for being here with us.